Okay, so now it's been a few days since the Resident Evil 4 remake was officially announced. I do want to look back at the leaks that happened a few months ago and see how that holds up in comparison to what we know about the game now. With the trailer releasing a couple days ago, we kind of have a general idea of what the game is going to look like and how the game is going to differ from the original, and there is a lot of key points to pick out of that trailer. But what I'm going to do today is kind of look at the trailer, see what we know from the trailer, and then kind of look back at that list and see if it matches up, because honestly it's surprising how much of it does seem to be quite accurate. So without further ado, let's just jump into it and get started with what we very much do know is a fact. So the big key thing that you can get out from the trailer basically immediately is the complete tonal shift from original 4 and remake 4. Now I've already mentioned this in the past, the tone of Resident Evil 4 for me isn't particularly good. Like, I do like it, it is good, it is fun to play because of it, but it kind of feels very action movie tone. Like, it's not, the stakes are really high, but no one really seems to care that much. You know what I mean? But with the remake, straight out of the gate, you know, it is a lot more involved, it's a lot darker. They're obviously going for more of a horror game feel, which makes sense because of what the game is, and I'm all for it. I mean, that has left some people with a mixed opinion. Some people don't think they should change the tone of the game at all, because they'll ruin what the game is, and there's a whole video coming out about that in terms of, you know, the mixed opinion about the remake so far soon. But for now, what I'll say is I like the new tone. I think it'll be very good, and it'll probably change the game overall, probably for the better, in my personal opinion. Keeping with the tone of the game in general, there was another part of that leak that suggested that Leon would have some kind of trauma or PTSD from the events of Resident Evil 2, and that is definitely the case from the trailer. There is a bit at the end of the trailer that shows Leon, I believe, is probably on the way to the village, and he mentions how he wishes he could forget what happened on that night, which probably does mean the events in Raccoon City, and how next time it happens it needs to be different, it has to be different, and he's definitely probably having a bit of a issues dealing with it, because it is a big deal. You know, he's like one of very few people that survived the night, so it makes sense that he's kind of affected by it, and that's definitely something that's probably going to be quite prominent in this game, which is good, because in 4, again, current 4, it did happen, but it doesn't seem to have really bothered him that much. So yeah, having it be more front and center with the remake version is going to be pretty interesting to see. Next up was the point about it being a next-gen only game and a PS5 exclusive. It is not a PS5 exclusive, let me throw that out there right now. It is on PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. It is not on PS4 and Xbox One, as far as we know so far. So the rumours about it being a next-gen only game are true, and that's probably going to be a bit of a disappointment for some people. I know the PS5 is still in quite difficult means to get hold of. Hopefully that just kind of fixes itself soon, but there is a lot of people that don't have next-gen consoles or can't afford them, so having the game be only on next-gen is a problem for some people, and I do understand that. But at the same time, a lot of games that are coming out next year that have slates for next year aren't on PS4 and Xbox One, and it's only a matter of time before, you know, the next generation does kind of cycle out the old one. It happens every single time. It takes a few years to fully happen, so not every single game will be next-gen only, but they do start phasing it into that kind of system over a couple of years period, which is now almost a couple of years anyway, so it is going to happen. It does suck, but hopefully the new consoles are a bit more accessible by the time this game does come out. So now let's lean into what is left with this whole leak list of things that were going to be involved with the 4 remake. Like I said, the first few points were on that list and they are very much true. Does that give this list some kind of credibility? No. Maybe someone got lucky. Maybe some of it is true and some of it isn't. Again, with leaks, just take everything with a little bit of doubt, because until you see it for real, just assume it isn't true. But we'll get into it now and see how it might play into the game. I think the big thing on the list for me that I want to see implemented into 4 is the semi-open world idea that the game seems to suggest through leaks that it has. Now, this basically means it's in the same vein as Resident Evil Village, where you have a hub area, and then all of the additional areas are kind of linked to that, and you can go to them at will. Obviously with Resident Evil 4, current Resident Evil 4, you kind of progress through the game in stages, and when you get to a certain point, you can't go back. With Village, you can basically go anywhere you want to until you get to the point of no return, which is when you go to the factory. Like, after that point, you can't go back. So, you know, there is a cut-off point, but other than that, you can kind of freely explore the world. Obviously, you can't go back to the castle, which is a shame, but the rest of it, completely explorable. And I think that would be good for 4. You know, the village is quite big if you think about it, you know, and having the power of the new game, obviously there's a lot of loading screens with 4 at the moment, but with the remake you can kind of expand it and make it bigger because there'll be less loading screens to deal with, so you can load more in, which would be really cool to see. And obviously it's not just the village, there's the castle, which is pretty big in 4 anyway, and then the island at the end, so you could definitely expand the game to be a bit more explorable, very easily. Next up was the first and third person options. Now there's a couple avenues that you can go down based on the reveal and what could happen. So I have a couple ideas myself. One is that Leon's section of the game is in third person, and then maybe when you play as Ashley, who, you know, if you've played 4 already, doesn't have any weapons or anything like that, maybe that'll be in first person. Maybe that'll be like a hardcore horror bit of the game. You know, imagine her bit in 4 when you go through the rooms with the armored knights that kind of wake up. Imagine that in first person and a bit more like horror focused. That would be really cool to see. You could also just make it a toggle. I know a lot of newer fans of Resident Evil kind of started playing the game through 7 and 8 and they're in first person, and people like those games. Maybe there is just an option to play it in first and third. Do I see that happening? It's possible, but I would rather play the game in third. And then of course as well you have the VR support that's coming for the game, which technically is first person. So it could be that. It could just be that they've mentioned that and it's actually the VR portion of the game, because we know that there's content being made for 4 Remake with the PlayStation VR 2, so that could be the first person aspect of things as well. Next up is Ada Wong's campaign being put into the main game rather than being a separate ways kind of extra scenario. This is pretty cool to hear. From the trailer you can obviously tell that Ada is in the game still, so she hasn't been cut out, which would make sense because she's a big part of the game. And it seems to suggest that you'll kind of transition from her and Leon, like throughout the game, and do her points of the game when they fit in to make sense to the story, and then go back to him when that part is done. That would be pretty cool. Kind of feel like it would work how Resident Evil 2 and 3 Remake do it, where you kind of get a portion of the game where you play as them, and then you go back to the other character, and the things that that character has done affect how you do it. So, you know, it would be good to see that. It would make the game a little bit longer as well, which is pretty cool. I would imagine there's going to be sections of the game where you play as Ada, sections of the game where you play as Ashley, and maybe you even play as Lewis in this game. That would be pretty cool to see. And then last but not least, this is one that's very open to interpretation and what it could mean, but it basically suggests that 4 is going to have references or ties in to Resident Evil Village, and this doesn't really make a lot of sense on the surface of things. Keep in mind that Village takes place far, far into the future compared to when 4 takes place. Now, it doesn't mean that the story of Village is going to be referenced in 4, because again, wouldn't make sense at all, but my bet is probably on character names being referenced, whether that's Miranda, or one of the Lords, or it could be the merchant in 4 talking about the Duke, because obviously if you play Resident Evil Village, you'll know that the Duke does know the merchant in Resident Evil 4, so maybe there's some back and forth there between the two of them, and he's mentioned in 4, whereas the merchant is referenced in 8. So that it could be as simple as that. It could be as more so that maybe Sadler knows Miranda, or Salazar knows Dimitrescu. I don't know. It could be anything like that. But who knows what it will be. It might not even be there. But again, this is a leak, quote unquote leak, but it would be pretty interesting to see if that's the case. But that's pretty much going to cover it, to be honest. I mean, a lot of the other points are very small in terms of how gameplay works and stuff like that. More so on the combat changes and on weapon changes and how you acquire weapons and enemies you fight. More kind of smaller things, but largely the same. I think there's additional enemies being added to the game. More of a pursuer type enemy. I would imagine that'll be Mendez. By look at the trailer, it seems like Mendez will be a pursuer in the village section of the game. Could be wrong, but it definitely looks like that's the case. As well as some smaller quality of life changes for the game and tweaks like that. Just general remake stuff. But let me know what you think of the options that could be in the game on this list. As always, Let me know your thoughts on Resident Evil 4 Remake in general, because I am pretty fucking excited for it, I won't lie. It looks really, really good. I'm a big fan of 4 anyway, so I'm interested to see what they do and how they change it. And there'll be a video coming out soon talking about the kind of mixed reception the game has so far. But until then, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Remember to leave a like on the video if you did, and subscribe for more Resident Evil news and content. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you all tomorrow.